Hi there. After that, you might be expecting God, but he was busy. So they sent me instead. It's interesting, I came to do this talk today, and they had me listed as a community statistician, and I've been called a lot of things in my life, and some of them make me very angry. And that's probably the most original thing I've ever been called. I'm actually a journalist. And but I think I've fallen into the world of community statistician, so I guess that's kind of cool, nerdy. But I don't walk around with a clipboard like a census taker. I'm a journalist, and community is very important to me because of what I do with my job. I travel to different places, and I think that we really misunderstand community in America. We misunderstand it in a couple of ways that I think really lead us off on some bad tracks and when we try to make policy decisions, try to figure out what to do with the country. And I think I have a better way of dealing with the issue of community, of understanding the issue of community that really captures more of the nuances and subtleties of really what makes an American place a cohesive whole. And it's very important to me, and I think it's going to be very important to this whole nation, that we get a better grasp of what community really is in the United States, because we're coming up on a decade that's going to be really, I don't want to say scary, but it's going to be really interesting. We're headed in a lot of different directions, and we need to kind of re-examine how we know community and understand community. I came up with the idea for Patchwork Nation. As I said, I've been a journalist now for about 20 years, more than 20 years. And this is what I do. I go to towns and I stay at a lot of motels, not hotels, motels. And I drink a lot of bad coffee and I eat at a lot of bad diners. And if you do that enough and you go to enough different places and do that, you begin to recognize likenesses. And you realize that the crummy diner you're sitting in Minnesota really isn't that different from the diner you were in Tennessee or the one you were in Colorado. And you start drawing comparisons between places. And I think all journalists do this. I think it's when you're on the road a lot, anybody who travels the country a lot, you see places and you begin to understand how complicated the country is. It's a big, complicated place with places that are all over that share common traits. And even though all journalists understand this, every 4 years we have this thing called a presidential election. And because of the way politics works in this country and the way kind of the reporting apparatus is set up, this kind of complicated understanding we have of the United States boils down into this. This is the 2004 Kerry Gore map. Some of you may have seen this before. Whoever did this, I'm sure, is a very wealthy man, though I do think, I swear to God, there's some guy probably right on the A of Jesus land right there who's created a separate thing that says, like, common sense people and godless heathens for the blue area. This map, I mean, it's funny, but the bottom line is we know this map is not right? I mean, not just the informative headers, but Texas is red. Okay, sure, Texas is red, and New York is blue. But look, there's a lot of blue in Texas, and there's a lot of red in New York. I mean, seriously, there are Republican areas in New York and Democratic areas of Texas. And we know this as journalists. We know this doesn't really work. So what do? We have to think, well, there's got to be a way of understanding these different types of Americans differently. So let's slice them demographically. Let's talk about things like 18 to 24-year-olds, or let's talk about what African Americans are thinking, or let's talk about women. That's a really good one because they're only half the population, right? So they must have common beliefs and things about things. It's just wrong. We know this is wrong, but this is what we do. And we take women as a thing, and somebody will win the woman vote in 2012. But that doesn't really mean anything. Because this woman is really disassociated from place. This is the way we see demographics when we talk about them. Women, 18 to 24-year-olds. But women, that woman is different. This woman lives in suburbia, and she has a nice house and a couple of cars and a mortgage and maybe a family. And then there's this woman who lives in New York City, and she has a nice apartment and goes out at night and has a good time. And then there's this woman who lives in rural Nebraska and works in maybe the company business and stays home. The place matters, but we don't pay attention to place. When we talk a lot of times about community in America, and journalists, when we do it, we talk about these demographic groups, and we know that women are too broad, so we come up with these different things like soccer mom, or NASCAR dad, or one of my favorites is Catholic. What's going to happen What's going to happen with the Catholic vote in 2012? That's a really tough question to answer. You know why? Because there is no Catholic vote, okay? Like, Catholics in New York City vote differently than Catholics in rural Kansas. I absolutely guarantee. If you looked at the numbers, it would tell you that. We know this is wrong, and we know we need to get back to talking about community again, so we fall back on red and blue. And the problem with red and blue, when we're not talking about these demographic groups, isn't just that there are blue parts of Texas and red parts of New York. It's that even within the blue, it's different, right? And within the red, it's different. So I grew up outside Detroit. Detroit is a very blue place, if you were to look at it during a presidential election. It's very democratic. What is Detroit? It's a big, hulking, post-industrial metropolis with a large African-American population, poor, low education levels. It's about 40 miles from Ann Arbor, which is also extremely blue, if you look at it on a presidential map. You know, and what is Ann Arbor? It's wealthy, it's white, it's educated. I mean, it's diverse, but it's relatively white. And this is the problem with thinking about blue America. You can do the same thing with red America. You can talk about Fargo. Fargo is a pretty, rural location. It's low incomes, property values are cheaper. And then you have something like Orange County. And, you know, Orange County, I think you have more wealth, you have more, nicer cars, and you probably have I've never verified this, but I imagine you have a much higher level of plastic surgery to person. I have not researched that yet. Also, I have not heard that anybody is considering Real Housewives of Fargo, but if you are, call me and let's talk, because we can do some business. The problem with red and blue is it boils us down to these little things, but we know as journalists that we need, and as Americans, even as we talk about these things, we talk about red families and red states and blue states, because we know that community does matter, and their places are different somehow. Our definitions are just way too broad. So what I've been doing now, what I started doing 4 years ago, because there was this election coming up, and this has bothered me for a long time, because I spent all that time in those lousy cafes. They're not all lousy, just a lot of them. And what I did is I worked with some academics to take every bit of data we could about every county in America and did a regression analysis on it and then clustered them to come up with 12 different kinds of place in America, okay? And when you look at this map, you see that it's complicated. There are some types that are regional, that those yellow areas through the middle of the country there, that's what I call evangelical epicenters. You have they really are. You have these places in the Southwest. These are large Latino populations. In that dark blue area up there in Utah, those are the Mormons. And we actually gave the Mormons their own category because they were chosen. But also because it's really interesting. When you break down the country this way, you really do get an understanding that even though those places are socially conservative, like a lot of these evangelical communities, they're different. The differences are there at the community level, even in the 21st century. They still exist in the community level. And I want to talk about some of the differences really quickly here. This is a couple different types I look at in Patchwork Nation. This red area is something that I call service worker centers. These are low-income communities with a lot of people kind of living on the margins. And nobody has health insurance, nobody has benefits. Not nobody, but very few numbers. And then you look at those beige areas, that's what I call, in Patchwork Nation, those are the wealthy, moneyed burbs. These are places with higher than average median household incomes, high education rates, good jobs. And you can see some of them are actually fairly close to each other. You drive over a county line and you can be in a kind of different place. But understanding these communities and seeing what really happens when you look at them, and particularly the economics of them. I mean, I did this to look at politics, but the economics can be very interesting. This is what you look at when you see the way I break down the country in different ways in terms of the income divide. We all know that there's a growing income inequality in this country. But when you break it out at the county level, this is what you see. You know, over on the left, on your left, the moneyed burbs, you know, they're about $4,000 richer. These are all dollars are all adjusted for inflation. They're about $4,000 richer than they were 30 years ago. The service worker centers are about $3,000 poorer. And there's no reason this is going to stop. These places are going in different directions. They see the country very differently. People living in these places have a very different understanding about what's happening in the country. It's just one example. We can also look at the places that I call tractor country. This is largely a big rural America, farming country. These are rural locations that are also agriculturally based. These places are obviously very conservative, but they also just function completely differently because they're based on agriculture. Their world is different. They see the world differently. We're all living through a recession right now. But the recession in tractor country doesn't really exist. There is no foreclosure problem. Their unemployment rate, these are the latest numbers, the national unemployment rate is 9.1%. But you get out to these places that are rural agricultural communities, they're at 6%. There is no foreclosure problem. They see the problems of the country differently. The other places I was talking about a little earlier, these are the places that I call these places the evangelical epicenters. And these places have actually been hit very hard economically. But they're not going to vote on economics. These places vote on different issues. They vote on issues of culture. They vote on issues of social issues. These are the places what we look at and we're like, what's wrong with those people? What you have to understand, because I think most of us are from a fairly big, dense urban population, they look at you and say, what's wrong with you? That's what we need to understand, because in this country right now, we're throwing things back and forth at each other. That's what's driving the divisive nature. But what we have to understand is the divisiveness in America right now. When we look down the street at Capitol Hill and we're like, why can't they get anything done? It's because when you look at the country this way, it's really hard to get things done. Because these people, the people who live in these different communities, need different things, and they want different things. And what's really happened over the past 10 years, we're not just in a recession. Things are changing. The economy is changing, and it's not just changing for a little while, it's changing for good. The culture is changing, the technology is changing, and ultimately this is going to lead to political changes. When you look at the differences in these places, right? Even in the age of iPads and Twitter, and I love both those things, community still matters. Place still matters in America, and we can't forget that. We absolutely can't forget it. As we head toward 2012, and we're all kind of looking, we're getting that look in our eye again, when we start looking at those other people and wondering why they're doing what they're doing. I'm not asking you, and I think the important thing we have to understand as Americans, we don't all have to love each other because we just don't, and that's okay. But we have to understand is there's a reason why. There's a reason why. You have to try to understand where these different people and different places are coming from, and I think if we do that, we can have a much better understanding of not only where the country is, but where it's heading. And it's very important that we understand where it's heading because we're going to be making some very big changes in terms of how we govern ourselves in the next decade, I really think. I think we're really just seeing the beginning of a very turbulent time. And if we don't pay attention to the differences in what these communities want and need, we're doing ourselves and we're doing these places a big disservice. And I think most important, we're going to get it wrong. When we start redoing things in this country, we're going to get it wrong. I think we simply cannot afford to do that. We need to reimagine community in this country in a different way that captures the subtleties and nuances. And if we do that, I know things may seem bad, but we're going to come out of it okay. You got to understand first, place still matters in the 21st century. Thank you.